You alluded to it in the press conference today, that there was a huge transformation from the individual PC user to the network,
Yep.
and how that's affected what you are focused on.
Yeah, and then roughly 10 years ago, you had this whole web services construct. I mean, you needed to have the phenomenon of the web to address the connectivity issue, right? You had to break the back of the client-server model, which is what the web did, right? Broke the back of that, freed up the client to be able to go anywhere, freed up the server, for that matter, for far more effective interoperability. So that sort of isolated computing model that emerged in the late 70s and thrived during the 80s and early 90s then shifted. And then it became clear to people that these interoperability scenarios, were far more viable. If you think about the dialogue around web services back in the year 2000, it was really saying, okay, well, now that we have all of these places on the web that are delivering capability, those capabilities are service. If I can register a service, and then I can find a service, I can bind to a service, and I can create an application scenario that effectively collects multiple services from multiple service providers, and establish an end-to-end process flow that is an aggregation of effectively multiple externally accessible services. Those same ideas apply equally inside the firewall, and all that gave rise to the enthusiasm for service-oriented architecture. Right?
And and it's expressed now in both places by your iWidget, basically a so-called mashup model.
Right. Yeah, and it's taken yet another turn, particularly for non-transactional types of services. If it's a pure information-based service, well, why not just simply establish it as some sort of a Web 2.0 interface structure, and then I can access it, I can mash it with other things, so I can effectively assemble a large number of these things. The widgets are nothing but the visual representation, right, linked to that underlying service, and I can craft a fairly sophisticated application using those techniques. Typically, when you flip to requiring transactional integrity, you have to delve into some things that are a little more programmatic. And you care a little bit more about the strength of the infrastructure, because you need remediation, compensation, rollback, recovery routines. So there's a little bit more heavyweight stuff that has to come in. But the transactional side of what takes place in the world is actually the minority. The information side is the majority of what goes on in applications.
And that's where you're going with this influx of analytics. You're handling
you get another wave on top of what's already there. Is to say, well, if we can get at all this data, how can we organize it in a way that makes it more useful, and can we effectively mine the nuggets?
So, much is made of the difference between so-called the Twitter sphere. It's coming on strong, and obviously in terms of Silicon Valley, and the notion that there's some valuable roll-up that's going on, similar to the Y2K time period. Only this is the one where messaging becomes a sort of a grafting of the enterprise message bus, and whatever this new micro-message architecture is. A lot of people say that those are two separate things. So that you use, I forget what the IBM term is for monitoring the blogosphere, sentiment analysis, as opposed to the more corporate internal mining of information. Do you see that bifurcation?
I think there is a separation, and I don't think the separation is going to go away. That doesn't mean that companies won't look for ways to bridge across those two things, but I think that they're still going to maintain a separation. I think that, and if anything, that separation is made worse by increased regulation, government oversight, and reporting requirements that have companies even more concerned about ensuring that information is being protected. A lot of fear about to what extent will information related to my clients that I'm obligated to keep private leak across because I have allowed the environment to become too porous?
Well, doesn't mobile kind of rip that apart anyway?
There are numerous things that rip that apart. I mean, every day companies put themselves at risk, because of the lack of an effective data governance process, and things get downloaded to PCs, local devices, handhelds, et cetera, and often make their way out of the corporate controlled environment, and therefore are effectively creating a risk. But companies are spending more and more time looking at what are their data governance processes, and are they clamping down on things that they would truly jeopardize their brand if they lost. Probably the best example is all of the federal and state regulations related to financial data. So these, identity theft things, account information getting out. If you're a credit card company or a bank, in most places now you have to report that publicly, right? It's a black eye to your brand. A number of these things that have happened. So these institutions are becoming ever more sensitive to what data do I allow my employees to ever extract out of a server. And can I effectively, manage it, block it, and control it so that my brand is not in jeopardy?
What do you think about strategies like Salesforce, where they're binding to the Twitter and Facebook streams? They're using it as part of their CRM products. Do you think that's...
We actually are offering the same thing in our Lotus Connections technology. In other words, you have to allow the scenarios to exist if a company wants that scenario. Right? People don't want to be inhibited. Right? If they want to cross that boundary and they want to create corporate identities, or employee identities through LinkedIn. Right? I mean, a lot of companies would say, no way, I'm never going to allow that to happen.
Sure.
Some companies are becoming more open to these ideas, right? And I think
because that's where the talent is.
And they have, those concerns. It really depends upon the industry. If you talk to those in highly regulated industries, they'll tell you no way. You talk to people in other industries, they'd say, well, I'm not sure it makes me comfortable, but I know it's going on and maybe I can't stop it, so maybe I need to enable it in a way that I have some visibility and control over it because it's going to happen anyway, type of thing. So it varies quite a bit. So we're enabling those same scenarios. So if you want to allow your employees to Twitter out in the open, we enable that. We also do microblogging inside of IBM. About half the IBM population microblogs today.
And what platform do you use?
Our own.
And what's it called?
Well, it's part of the Connections technology. The Connections is a collection of technologies that we've worked on in IBM Research and Development that we then roll into our in-house environment.
Is the same time part of that?
Well, the same time is a part of that, but the microblogging capability is incremental to the same time. It's separate.
And it's built on open source?
Well, it's built on open standards, not built on open source. All right? It's all controlled through a WebSphere infrastructure.
Okay.
For reasons of logging and recovery.
Sure.
Employees want to have this stuff there. IBMers today, we have, we're probably pushing 3,000 communities, close to 1 million dog-eared documents in the IBM company. There are thousands of blogs and wikis. As I said, we have 4,000 employees. About half of them now are microblogging. We do 12 million instant messages a day inside of our company. So we're very active, prolific users of all these different technologies for unified communications, for social networking, for allowing people to find people. The problem our people have is they're trying to find answers. They serve clients on very complicated topics, and they're hunting for who has the answer to my problem. One of the ways I get the answer to my problem is I participate in these various community structures. I either go into them to find experts or find information that's value to me. I offer myself up as an expert. I start to engage in these types of chat environments, and clearly microblogging actually has a lot of interesting positive byproducts for people in terms of the community participation brings people in fairly immediately. Here's where I went, right? Or here's where I'm going. Someone else, comes back at you with, oh, I was just there. here's what I talked about, right?
Sure.
I just met with them. We just had this meeting last week. We did this over here, right? And you get this free flow of information
Yeah,
back
this
and
kind
forth.
of swarming behavior.
Yeah, swarming behavior that occurs, and you get a lot of positive collisions that happen, right? And the idea is that, at least within IBM, we establish a set of business conduct guidelines. Look, we understand there's etiquette, ladies and gentlemen, and there's also things that you probably shouldn't be posting, and sometimes some cultural sensitivities. Every now and then, someone has to be reminded, that's not so good. But by and large, it
So
works well.
you're a real adopter of this
We're
on a personal
fanatics.
level.
Yeah.
How is that being pushed out into the product cycle?
Well, that's in 2006. We launched the Connections portfolio to customers. Our view is that obviously you saw the examples out on the public internet side. We had been experimenting with and deploying these technologies since the late 90s in IBM. We started putting up expertise location and other types of things.
Same time was very early.
Same time was very early. So we were into this stuff ourselves, and our conclusion was that this probably would have value to customers, since the investments we had made were to some degree amortized by IBM's own internal use and the value we were getting. Obviously the relative marginal cost to put this stuff out in the market wasn't that great. It was unclear to me whether corporations were really ready for this, because you can't confuse yourself on what happens with teenagers and people in their personal lives to what will then go on in business. And we know the kinds of issues that exist in insurance companies and other institutions that tend to be very concerned about regulatory oversight. We were pleasantly surprised. This thing took off. Businesses were more ready for it than we had thought, which is good.
So this real-time, we had probably the first real-time conference 6 months ago, and it seems like everybody's using that now as part of their marketing.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a fundamental transition?
Yeah, I think the behaviors are changing. I think these things are very visible when you can measure over a long enough time period, and you begin to see fairly profound shifts and what's acceptable to people today is probably something beyond anything they thought they would be doing 10 years ago. And so I think these things are fundamental, and they're here to stay. Well, look, the bandwidth is there. The mobile communication capability is there. There's an ever-growing comfort with the technology. Sometimes almost too much comfort, because the next generation of kids coming in are extremely comfortable.
And there's a lot of fear from people feeling like it's gone beyond their ability to cope with the flow. The stream is.
Well, I think part of the problem is you actually don't want to cope with it. Right, it is as much as allow the interactions to occur. That our view, because we're avid users of this stuff, is that there is tremendous value if your company has a culture of problem solving. If you have a culture of protection, if it's a protectionist culture, and there are cultures that are very internally competitive. So they're informational. They're protective of information. They don't want to share because they feel that they're competing with each other.
People don't like to collaborate unless they're told to.
Well, I think there are companies in which the culture is a collaborative culture.
Do you think IBM's a collaborative culture?
We know we have a collaborative culture. I mean, there's no company in the world more prolific in its use of these technologies than we are, because it's a problem-solving culture.
Is that because it's a services-based organization?
No, it's a technology-based organization, and it's the most active users are in the technology professions. So you find much more significant everyday use by those that are deeper into technology than those that are not as deep into technology. The technologists are avid users of this stuff.
All right, well, we've got 1 minute here, so of all the things we've talked about, what's the most interesting thing to you that's changed in the past 10 years since?
Well, looking forward, well, first of all, I think that what we embarked upon with this simple idea around web services has been wildly successful, right? That we really brought about a sea change in this idea of service orientation. And that sea change has had all kinds of secondary ripple effects, as we just discussed, right? Lots of things are made possible through the standards, through the evolution of the web, through what's happening in 2.0 and social networking and so on. I think that our perspective is looking ahead, the combinatorial effect of ever-lowering cost of microprocessor technology manifested in intelligence everywhere, combined with server capability that effectively gives you supercomputing capacity at extremely low prices, allows you to instrument things you could never afford to instrument before, collect more data, understand more things that are happening, and make the world more efficient and more effective. And I think the next decade, we'll see a profound set of changes taking place as we get much more control over the world around us by using information technology, by using electronics, instrumentation, and information technology to instrument and analyze the world around us. We'll do a better job of preserving the environment. We'll deal with fundamental and profound issues related to water and natural resources. We'll figure out how to pollute less. We'll figure out how to get more value out of the massive capital infrastructure that's deployed around the world, which we're at a point where we simply can't afford to replace it the way we might have replaced it in the past. The money's not there, and the resources are not there.
But competitively, you're going to be, this is good for the company too, right?
Yeah, we think it's great. Yeah. Remember, IT has always made its own market. There was never a market for IT. You always made your own market. Yeah. And it's finding new ways to apply this. I mean, this is the most adaptive tool that mankind's ever created. And so it's just finding new ways to create it, and suddenly you have a much bigger industry. Who would have thought this would be a $1.2 trillion industry?
What do you think it'll be in 10 years?
Could double in size. There's potential to double in size. But it'll double in size because operating expense and capital expense from other unrelated areas get converted over to IT spending. It's not because everything that we do today will just simply grow fast enough. We're going to do a whole bunch of things we haven't done before. And I think the definition will widen out, and the results will be a much bigger market.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.